Hello and welcome to another episode of the Other Ranting Atheist. Yes, I'm not the only one out there, and I'm really happy about that. So, what will I be ranting about today? Well, I'm going to do something a little different, sort of lacking a little bit on street preaching material. Not that, street preachers don't put out material regularly, but, at this point, I'm kind of always going over the same thing. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about apologetics in a specific example of apologetics mentioned by Frank Turek. So the topic of today would be, does God change his mind? So I'm going to play a clip by Frank Turek, and then I will give my response.
God's not changing his mind. And the scriptures that talk about God changing his mind, like where Moses says, I went to God and said, don't wipe out Israel. I think it's like Exodus 33, right? And then God says, gee, Moses, I never thought of that. Yeah, okay, I won't wipe them out. Well, it doesn't say that, but you get the idea. You're wondering, well, is Moses giving God new information? No, that's not the issue. What it was before Moses prayed, God was going to wipe out Israel, but God always knew Moses would pray and always knew he wouldn't wipe out Israel. God hasn't changed. Moses had changed.
And so that was going to be the next part of that question. So would you say it's necessarily true that God does change his mind, or that God doesn't really change his mind? It was always his plan to begin with.
God doesn't change his mind. God always knew what we would do. From our perspective, it appears God's changed his mind. But he hasn't changed his mind. From Moses' perspective, God, don't wipe out Israel. Okay, you won't do it? Okay, thank you. You changed your mind. No, I was.
Okay, so that's a clip there. And now I'm going to explain why that apologetic does not work. So according to what Frank Turek just said, and he said Exodus 33, it's actually Exodus 32. But the reason why that doesn't work is because what he's saying is that God always knew that Moses would intercede on behalf of the people, and so he said that he would destroy Israel, even though he wouldn't, even though he knew that he wouldn't actually destroy Israel. So here, the excuse that Frank Turk is making, in order to make God not change his mind, what he's essentially doing is making God a liar. Now, if you look at Numbers 23:19, it says that God can't change his mind and he can't lie. So what Frank Turek is doing here is that in order to make it so that God can't change his mind, he's essentially making God a liar. Because he's saying that God went to Moses saying that he would do something, that something being destroying the Israelites, even though God knew that he wouldn't do it. Isn't that what lying is? Lying is deceiving. And so, according to what Frank Turek says, God literally deceived Moses into interceding on behalf of the people so that he can quote unquote change his mind. So basically, what he's saying is that God lied to Moses to get the response that he wanted so that he wouldn't destroy the Israelites. So essentially, God didn't change his mind. But in essence, he's making him a liar. Now, there's really no other way around it. Either when you look at it, especially if you believe that God is omniscient, in other words, he knows everything, there's really only two options. Either God said what he said in order to get that response out of Moses, which is Frank Turek's um, excuse here, or God changed his mind. Now, it's either or. So Frank Turek decides to go with the fact that God didn't change his mind, but essentially he's calling God a liar. There's really no workaround around this. Either way, you lose. As an apologist, if you try to make an excuse for why God doesn't change his mind, even though there are several other scriptures that show God changing his mind, like Jonah chapter 3 and 1 Samuel 15, to give a couple of examples. So I'm not really sure why Frank Turek chose that hill to die on. I don't really think it's worth it, but I guess in his mind, God changing his mind is a lot worse than God lying, and so he's okay with making God a liar in order to say that God didn't change his mind. Um, but I guess if you're a Christian, it all depends. Which one do you think is worse? Would you rather that God lie, or would you rather that God change his mind? Personally, if I were a Christian, I would rather God change his mind than God lie. But Frank Turek took the other route, decided to go with making God a liar as opposed to God changing his mind. But essentially the apologetic either way does not work. Now I believe there is another video where he speaks about Exodus 32 again, and he says that well, the reason why um, God reacted the way he did was because Moses interceded, and that's what caused the quote unquote change of mind. But that doesn't work either, because if you keep reading in Exodus 32, you'll notice that after Moses, the way that God reacts to Moses is when Moses is on the mountain. After God says he's going to wipe out the Israelites, Moses says, no, you shouldn't do that, because what would the Egyptians say? Because he went through all the work of bringing them out of Egypt just to destroy them in the wilderness. And then God says, okay, I'm not going to do it. Moses comes down from the mountain. He sees that the Israelites are worshiping a golden calf. He gets angry. He grinds the golden calf into powder, puts it into water to force them to drink it, and then kills some of the Israelites who were responsible for committing idolatry. And then he tells them, I will go back to the mountain tomorrow to intercede on your behalf. So, if you want to say that the reason why God reacted the way he did was because Moses interceded, well, then that's a problem, because Moses said that the next day he will go back to the mountain to intercede for them. So, would Moses need to intercede twice? What's the point? If he needed to intercede twice, then I guess that would mean that the first intercession did not work, which means that God's reaction wasn't actually a reaction, unless you need to intercede more than once in order for God to forgive sins, which I don't think would be necessary. And so what I'm showing here is an example of an apologist, I guess, choosing what they would consider to be the lesser of two evils, in this case, which would be God changing his mind as opposed to God lying. But in my opinion, either way you lose. Because again, Numbers 23:19 says that God can't lie or change his mind. And so you have to choose, especially if you believe that God is omniscient, which the Bible says that God knows everything. So the Bible clearly says that God is omniscient. So that means that you have to choose a hill to die on. Either God changed his mind or God lied. But you can't have it both ways. And so I just wanted to do a short video talking about apologetics. There are plenty of others that I will talk about later on, and I will still throw in street preaching videos here and there, especially when they say something that I would consider to be new or something that I haven't mentioned before, or if I get hit with a certain inspiration of ranting, depending on sometimes a street preacher will say something that kind of triggers me into doing a rant, like I did with my previous video. And so I think I'll switch back and forth between mentioning street preachers and then mentioning apologetics in general. All right, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you on the next one.